Hey everyone, and welcome back for today's deep dive. You ready to get into some current affairs?
Absolutely. Always fascinating to see what's making headlines. And especially today, January 27th, 2025, there's a lot to unpack.
Definitely. And for those of you prepping for the UPSC exams, you know this is the stuff that matters.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, well, let's jump right in. First up, we're heading over to Bhitarkanika National Park.
Odisha, right.
Yeah, they just finished their annual reptile census. And guess what? They counted over 1,800 saltwater crocodiles.
Wow, that's impressive.
Right. And get this, 18 of them were albino.
Albino crocodiles. Now, that's something you don't see every day. I actually read about how they did the count, too. They used that timestamp camera app. Pretty cool.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. Taking videos with the time and GPS coordinates right there built in. That's going to make things a lot more accurate.
Definitely cuts down on human error. Plus, imagine trying to keep track of all those crocs manually.
Yeah, no thanks. Seriously, this census is a great sign, for India's Crocodile Conservation Project.
Oh, absolutely. That project started way back in the 70s, right?
1975 to be exact. They wanted to get the crocodile population up to, like, 5 or 6 per kilometer of water.
And it sounds like they've done even better than that. It really shows how effective focused conservation efforts can be. Bhitarkanika National Park is a Ramsar site too, did you know?
Oh, right. A wetland of international importance. Super diverse ecosystem. Makes sense they'd have such a thriving croc population.
Exactly. Okay, ready to switch gears. Let's talk economics. The government just announced some changes to the Open Market Sales Scheme, OMSSD. You familiar with that?
It's all about managing those surplus food grains, right?
Yeah, basically selling rice and wheat at controlled prices, trying to keep the market stable and, make sure people have access to food. Big role for the Food Corporation of India, or FCI, there.
So what's changing with this scheme?
Well, the big thing is the reserve price of rice. They're lowering it significantly.
Interesting. What's the thinking behind that?
Two main goals, it seems. One, make food more affordable, particularly for those who are struggling. And two, boost ethanol production. The idea is to use some of that extra rice to make ethanol.
Okay, so hitting both food security and renewable energy. Two birds, one stone. But, does that impact farmers at all?
That's a good question. If rice prices drop too low, it could definitely affect their income. It's a tricky balance.
For sure. All right, well, from rice to taxes. I read that the CDCT, that's the Central Board of Direct Taxes, they just came out with new guidelines for something called the Principal Purpose Test. Sounds complicated.
It is a bit, yeah. It's all part of double tax avoidance agreements, or DTAAs. Basically, it's a way to crack down on tax avoidance.
Okay, so if someone's trying to use these international agreements to avoid paying their fair share, this test can catch them.
Exactly. They're looking at the main reason behind a business arrangement. If it's just to dodge taxes, they lose those treaty benefits.
Well, got it. So, like, if a company sets up a shell company in a country with super low taxes just to move their profits there?
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing they'd be looking for. These new guidelines are all about bringing more clarity and making sure India's tax system is in line with global standards, like the OECD's Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Framework.
BEPS.
Right.
Yep.
That's the one.
I did see that these guidelines are mostly going to apply to future investments. What about stuff that's already in place?
Right. So investments made before April 2017, those are generally grandfathered in. So no need to worry about those. The focus is really on preventing problems moving forward.
Okay, makes sense. Well, speaking of important dates, today is National Girl Child Day, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And with a very fitting theme this year, empowering girls for a bright future. 10 years since the launch of Beti Padhao, too.
Yeah.
The BBBP scheme.
Right. And while there's definitely been progress, there's still so much to do, especially when it comes to things like gender discrimination, violence against girls, and access to education and healthcare.
Absolutely. Those are real challenges that we still need to tackle head on. It's about translating those policies and goals into actual change on the ground.
For sure. Okay, ready for something completely different. Let's talk hypersonic technology.
All right, let's do it.
So, big news from DRDO, India's Defense Research and Development Organization. They successfully tested a scramjet engine.
Oh, wow, that's a major development. We're talking hypersonic missile technology here. These things can travel at over 5 times the speed of sound.
Yeah, it's like something straight out of science fiction.
Yeah.
So what's so special about this particular test?
Well, a few things, actually. First, they got stable combustion in the engine. That's huge because it means they can sustain that hypersonic flight. Second, they actually developed the fuel for the scramjet themselves, right here in India.
Impressive.
Right. And third, they've created a special coating to protect the engine from those insane temperatures. Because, things get pretty hot when you're traveling that fast.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So where does this put India in the hypersonic race, I guess you could call it?
Well, it's definitely a big step forward. But we can't forget that China is also making significant progress in this area.
Right. And that raises some concerns, doesn't it?
Absolutely. While this technology can definitely strengthen India's defense, it also has the potential to escalate tensions in the region.
It's a complicated issue for sure. Okay, let's shift gears again. I want
Okay.
to talk about INCOIS, the Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services. They just won a major award.
Oh, yeah, the Subhash Chandra Bose Apda Prabandhan Puraskar for their work in disaster management, and rightfully so.
They do some incredible work, especially when it comes to tsunami warnings. I mean, they issue alerts in minutes, which would be life-saving for coastal communities.
Absolutely. They cover not just India, but 28 other countries around the Indian Ocean. They're using cutting-edge science to mitigate the impact of those natural disasters. It's truly remarkable.
It is. And I think they do more than just tsunami warnings, don't they?
Oh, yeah, much more. They're involved in search and rescue operations, provide all sorts of oceanographic data, and are even doing research on climate change.
Really? That's fascinating. Okay, last one for this part, and it involves Mauritius.
Ooh, island time.
Right. So the Indian Navy just finished a huge hydrographic survey for Mauritius. Covered like 25,000 square nautical miles of their waters.
Wow, that's extensive.
Yeah, using their advanced survey vessel, INS Sarvikshak. But, I mean, why is this such a big deal?
Well, having detailed maps of the seabed is crucial for Mauritius, for their maritime infrastructure, for managing resources, for coastal planning. I mean, it's foundational.
Right, it makes sense. I mean, we don't always think about what's happening under the water, but it's incredibly important.
It absolutely is. And, this survey also ties into India's broader strategy in the Indian Ocean region, their Sagar initiative.
Security and growth for all in the region, right?
Yeah. Exactly. By assisting Mauritius like this, India is strengthening relationships and showing their commitment to the region. It's a form of maritime diplomacy. And we're back for more. Part 2 of our deep dive into current affairs.
Before we move on, I was thinking about INCOIS. It's amazing how they can predict those tsunamis with such accuracy. I mean, it's literally life-saving technology.
Absolutely. It just goes to show how powerful science and technology can be when it comes to tackling real-world problems.
We can agree more. Okay, ready for our next topic?
Lay it on me.
All right, we're diving into elections. Democracy in action. Always a hot topic, especially for UPSC aspirants.
Especially this year, right? The Election Commission of India is celebrating its 75th anniversary.
Wow, 75 years. That's a major milestone.
It is the world's largest democracy, and the Election Commission has played a vital role in keeping those elections free and fair. And, this year's National Voters' Day, the theme really emphasizes that.
Nothing like voting. I vote for sure. I like
Yeah.
that. Simple, but powerful.
Right. Every vote does count. And we're talking about a massive electorate here. Almost 1 billion registered voters.
1 billion. It's mind-boggling how they managed to organize elections on that scale.
It's a huge undertaking, logistically speaking. But what's encouraging? More and more young people are voting, and we're seeing the gender gap in voter turnout shrink.
That's a good sign. The more inclusive our democracy is, the stronger it becomes.
Absolutely. And speaking of celebrating elections, did you hear about the Best Electoral Practices Awards?
Oh, right. The president will be giving those out on National Voters' Day, recognizing those unsung heroes who are working hard to make sure elections are run smoothly.
Exactly. Right, ready to jump back into the international arena.
Let's do it. Let's talk about India's role in the Indian Ocean region. Building on that hydrographic survey we discussed earlier.
Right, the one from Mauritius. That's just one piece of the puzzle.
So what's the bigger picture here?
It's all part of India's Sagar initiative, right? Security and growth for all in the region. They're working to foster cooperation and stability in the Indian Ocean and helping countries like Mauritius with things like hydrography, maritime security, disaster management.
So it's about more than just mapping the seabed. It's about building relationships and showing their commitment to the region.
Exactly. Diplomacy in action. And, this isn't the first time the Indian Navy has helped out with hydrographic surveys. They've mapped thousands of square kilometers for other countries in the region.
Really? I didn't realize they were so involved.
Oh, yeah. It's mutually beneficial, too. Those detailed charts help with navigation, which can boost industries like fishing, shipping, offshore exploration.
It's fascinating how something as technical as mapping the ocean floor can have such a big impact, not just for safety, but for the economy as well. And speaking of India and Mauritius, they have a pretty close defense relationship too, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Mauritius actually uses several aircraft that are built by HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited.
Like what kinds of aircraft?
They've got advanced light helicopters, a Dornier aircraft, but their cooperation goes beyond equipment. They do joint coastal radar surveillance, and Mauritius even has an officer stationed at the Indian Navy's Information Fusion Center.
Wow, that's a pretty significant level of trust and collaboration. Okay, let's take a step back for a second and recap everything we've covered so far.
Sounds good. Catch our breath.
We started with India's Crocodile Conservation Project, which was a great success story. Then we dug into the open market sales scheme and how it's being tweaked. And of course, we had to talk about those new guidelines for international taxes.
Right, and then we shifted gears to National Girl Child Day and all the important issues that raises.
Then it was hypersonic missiles. Bit of a sci-fi moment there.
And we can't forget INCOIS and their incredible work in predicting tsunamis. Talk about a life-saving mission.
Absolutely. And we wrapped up part one with that fascinating look at India's maritime diplomacy in action, with the hydrographic survey for Mauritius.
It's been quite a journey, right? And what's interesting is that each one of these stories, as different as they seem, is actually connected in some way. They're all part of a bigger picture.
It's like a giant web, isn't it?
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of understanding how the world really works. It's not enough to just focus on individual events. We need to see how they're all linked together.
And we're back, wrapping things up with part three of our current affairs deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, from crocodiles to taxes to hypersonic missiles.
And let's not forget those albino crocodiles. Those are pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely a highlight. But what's really stood out to me? It's how interconnected all these seemingly different events are.
Absolutely. That's the key takeaway here. It's like a giant web with all these threads weaving together, cause and effect, shaping the world around us.
Exactly. Like one event can trigger a chain reaction, impacting so many other things.
Think about it. India's success with crocodile conservation, that's not just about wildlife, it's about human effort, collaboration, scientific research. Those themes pop up again and again in our discussions, whether we're talking about disaster management or technology or even economics.
You're right. It's like everything's connected. Take that open market sales scheme, for example. At first glance, it's an economic policy, right? But then you realize it impacts food security, ethanol production, the role of the government. It's all intertwined.
Exactly. And it touches on social welfare, environmental concerns, politics. It's a whole system.
And then you've got something like that scramjet engine test. Amazing technological achievement, no doubt. But it also has these huge geopolitical implications. Hypersonic weapons, arms races, international security.
It's a whole new world. And it forces us to think about the ethical implications of these technologies.
So many layers to unpack. It really shows how important it is to look beyond just the headlines, to explore those connections, to understand how the world truly works.
It's about systems thinking. We can't just focus on isolated events or individual actors. We have to see the bigger picture.
Right, how everything fits together.
Exactly. And realize that changes in one area can have ripple effects throughout the whole system. And our actions, no matter how small they seem, can have those far-reaching consequences.
So whether you're aspiring to be a civil servant or just want to be an informed citizen, it's about understanding that interconnectedness.
Absolutely. It allows you to analyze situations more effectively, to anticipate challenges, to make better decisions. It's all about perspective.
So what advice would you give to our listeners, especially those preparing for the UPSC exams? How can they navigate this complex world?
It's not about memorizing facts and figures. It's about developing a framework for understanding how the world works. Connect the dots, seek out different perspectives, challenge your assumptions.
Don't just accept what you read or hear.
Exactly. Dig deeper, analyze, form your own conclusions. That's what critical thinking is all about. It's about seeing the bigger picture.
And recognizing that the world is constantly changing.
Absolutely. Current affairs are dynamic. It's an ever-evolving landscape. So be adaptable, be curious, never stop learning.
Well said. All right, knowledge seekers, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the current affairs of January 27th, 2025.
We've explored a lot today, but this is just the beginning. Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep those minds engaged.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends. Until next time, keep learning and keep diving deep.